Hello and welcome to IAB There, our weekly live stream in which we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. I'm Libby Morgan, Chief Strategy Officer at IAB. Today's session is titled, What Advertisers Need to Know About CTV, and we will be discussing both the popularity and impact of CTV and how advertisers need to respond to this shifting marketplace. I'm excited to say that I have Joel Fox, co-founder and EVP of Strategy and Innovation at Strategist, with me here today. Strategist is a programmatic managed services company specializing in executing sophisticated CTV advertising campaigns. Joel pioneered programmatic OTT advertising in 2015 and has since executed more than 50,000 campaigns. He thrives on the relentless pursuit of what's next in OTT and CTV advertising, and now runs Strategist's in-house innovation and R&D department, Strategist Labs. Okay, so welcome, Joel. Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your role and what you do.
Well, Libby, it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So as you have mentioned, I run what is affectionately referred to as Strategist Labs, which is, as you've also mentioned, the R&D department for advancing strategic, sophisticated programmatic connected television campaigns. And we've established this department because what we have observed in the space is that there is so much potential for further improvement and sophistication and innovation in connected television advertising that I have the distinct pleasure and luxury of working with a team that advances that. So we've built this out to have a team of data scientists and a team of some of the most experienced ad ops campaign managers ever on earth, working to essentially solve complex challenges, push the industry along in the way of thinking outside the box and bringing new innovations to market. So it's with all of those things that we oftentimes have great success in solving problems, and oftentimes we mix two metaphorical beakers of liquid and it blows up in our face, but we have a good time doing it and we believe we're doing it for the right reasons.
That's great. No, that sounds wonderful. So give me a little background on why you think connected television is so hot right now, and what about viewer behavior has impacted advertising behavior?
Well, I think connected television, having the luxury of the ability to look back to when we ran what's regarded as the world's first programmatic television campaign back in 2015, what we have seen is that consumers have said, this is how I want to watch my television today. Though we as marketers may draw a distinction between linear television and connected television and those subtle nuances in between, when we decide to go watch television in the evening, we're just watching TV, whether it comes through a broadcast signal or through the internet. But the connected television shift, we believe, is so incredibly powerful because it's given consumers more access. The amount of content that is now available is probably the most it's ever been in human television history. But it also unlocks a tremendous amount of opportunity for us as marketers to be a lot more thoughtful and strategic in who we're messaging to, what we're messaging to them with, and how we're measuring the outcome of those campaigns. Now, if it's okay to say, I think that advertiser behavior has some improvement to be done. One thing that we're doing in Strategist Labs is endeavoring to improve and fix the value proposition between marketer and viewer. I think that if we look at connected television in 2015 and then look at it today, generally speaking, what we're observing is just an increase in the number of ad pods and the amount of ads in those ad pods. And that's just a simple quantity play, right? I've seen this in the publisher world from my time before Strategists of just, we need to meet revenue goals, we need to maximize yield, we need to appease shareholders, just put more ads in. And I think that fundamentally breaks the value proposition that viewers and consumers have, in that in almost every facet of advertising, consumers tend to run from the advertisers. And then slowly but surely, we as marketers catch up. Connected television is no exception, but I think the opportunity that exists in CTV is not simply put more ads in front of consumers. Rather, let's pivot that and emphasize quality over quantity. Publishers, apps, SSPs, DSPs can all benefit from fewer ads if those ads are relevant and if they're targeted, and if marketers are able to measure the effect after that ad placement, thereby increasing what a marketer is willing to pay for a single ad placement. So what we're looking to do here is help marketers be more thoughtful and more strategic in who they're messaging and how they're messaging. And in return, we hope and we expect that consumers and viewers will see fewer ads, but engage with that finite number of ads more meaningfully.
That makes perfect sense. And I definitely appreciate that. Maybe we can explore that idea a little bit more in terms of how do you think advertisers need to be responding to this shifting marketplace? Because I think right now our only constant is change.
100%. That's something that we ourselves at Strategists have learned to embrace very early on. This industry that we all spend so much time in is moving at such a breakneck pace that truly the only constant is change. And we need to acknowledge the fact that as soon as we get comfortable and as soon as things get easy is about the time consumers have said, I don't want it that way anymore. I want it different. I want it new. I want it fresh. And we, of course, need to be obligated to keep pace with that. So, one thing that's really notable right now is the significant transition into ad-supported, both fast or completely free or subsidized ad-supported AVOD models. And this is counter to the early days of streaming up to and through COVID, where the name of the game was subscriber count, right? The Netflix and the Disney Plus model of, hey, let's just keep growing subscribers. They're going to pay an all-you-can-eat buffet model of 10, 15 bucks a month, and they're going to stream as little or as much as they want. I think what we have seen is a number of market forces in play here, up to and including now at this point with such bizarre economic uncertainty, consumers are tightening the purse strings. And with so much fragmentation in streaming, what we used to be able to stream in 1 or 2 apps, now you've got to have a subscription to 7, 8, or 9. And so through COVID, that was okay when we were all forced to stay home and locked up. And it's like, okay, cool, let's all watch the Tiger King and the Michael Jordan documentary all together. Now has become something where, oh, shoot, what app is that on? Oh, I don't have that one. I've got these 4. And so what we've experienced is an incredible amount of first app fragmentation and then app subscription fatigue, in that you and I and every other consumer looks at our credit card statement at the end of the month and goes, I didn't realize I was paying for 8 streaming apps and I don't really want to be anymore. And so you combine a series of market forces and all of a sudden, the gold standard of subscription-based streaming, Netflix, even comes out and acknowledges, hey, look, an ad-supported model is an unfortunate reality for us moving forward. And so it's going to be very interesting to see kind of the Netflix ad-supported model, the Disney Plus ad-supported model. But what that means for marketers is, first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that ad-supported streaming is here and it's here to stay. Wall Street and consumers have dictated that the subscription-based model is just not a sustainable long-term model. Now, it's not enough just to sit back and say, okay, cool, we're going to put some ads in Netflix and we're going to call it a day, because A, the fragmentation is very serious, but B, we've got to, again, get back to the fact that consumers have been running from advertising for so long that we don't just want to corner them again in the new era of Netflix and Disney Plus. We need to understand that we could and we should be doing things differently. And the fact that Netflix and Disney Plus and all connected television streaming is coming through an internet connection affords us the luxury, but also the responsibility to use data in the same way that a marketer does for their traditional digital advertising campaigns, to boolean together thoughtful data segments from their first party and enrich it with third-party data to ensure that only the households who are most likely and most interested in their message are those that are served the message. I think we've all probably had the experience of seeing an ad that is absolutely not relevant to us at all. And we probably saw it not once, but too many times. And that can be very off-putting. It's obviously a waste of advertising dollars. It can have a negative effect on that brand's perception. And so now, once again, I'm going to get on my soapbox and say Strategist Labs is here to help the industry be better and mend that value proposition by serving ads that are relevant, that are targeted, that are measured in their frequency so as to not be overly frequent, but at the same time, understand what happens to that consumer's browsing behavior and online behavior and overall purchase activity after that ad exposure, such as to continuously improve the process.
I'm glad you mentioned Netflix, because obviously we spent a lot of time talking about that here at IAB, the overall shift to advertising, advertiser-supported streaming, which has been very interesting, especially given inflation and consumer spending habits changing and all the mindfulness around that. So it's very interesting, their strategy. Let's explore maybe a little bit more around the key elements of a successful ad campaign. What are your thoughts on reach and frequency, relevance, et cetera? How do you measure? How do you kind of figure out what's important?
Yeah, this is where the labs and strategist labs metaphor really comes into play. And we think that contrary to traditional television advertising, which I'll be so bold as to say was at best spray and pray type mentality, relying on what I will be so bold as to say were borderline inaccurate, unreliable measurement numbers. We need to treat connected television and programmatic connected television advertising just like we would a science experiment, in that we want to start with a theory or a thesis or hypothesis to prove. And we want to do a lot of testing, and we want to set up variables with which to A/B test against. And we essentially at that point want to understand what's the right message to the right audiences on the right screens, the right number of times. So my thoughts on reach and frequency are that it's not a set it and forget it approach. It certainly isn't a buy every impression you can get approach either. I think that we very much have experienced as consumers, when we see an ad for the same product, the same time over and over and over again, and I certainly won't name names, but we all know there's streaming apps out there that are absolutely guilty of this. All that does is disengage the user, right? And if I'm streaming an app streaming a show on a particular app and I see the same ad for the 15th time in that episode, what's likely to happen is I'm probably going to close that app and go into a rival app, right? So this has implications not just for us as marketers and us as TV watchers, but also for the streaming apps that are now trying to capture more of our time and attention and keep us from going into other apps, right? And so we think that being very thoughtful in your use of data in determining which devices and which households should see your message, but then also being very thoughtful in measuring that reach and that frequency to ensure what is that right point of efficiency, where do diminishing returns begin to hit, and then just as importantly, the measurement after ad exposure is such an incredibly exciting and at this point in time, underutilized tool. We don't think that a one-size-fits-all approach for attribution should be applied. We certainly don't think that video completion rate should be applied to measure campaign success, because most apps, ad pods are non-skippable, right? So what are we really learning there? Rather, setting aside a theory to say, we're going to offer this message to these audiences, we're going to A/B test, we're going to be very thoughtful and very closely looking at the reach and the frequency numbers, but then ultimately put a bow around all that to understand how have we positively affected viewer browsing behavior? Are they visiting our website in greater numbers? Are we seeing conversions occur at a greater number? What about interactions in our other channels? Are our paid search and our paid social demonstrating greater levels of engagement? Shoot, even foot traffic measurement and location data, for as long as that's permissible and reliable to use, can be something that's very effective in understanding, did our connected television campaign move the needle in a meaningful way in terms of actual tangible consumer action?
We spend a tremendous amount of time talking about measurement, and as sort of definition shift and tracking mechanism shift and rules shift. What do you see as your biggest measurement challenge?
Ooh, yeah, I wish I could say there was just one challenge to it. We
You
think
can pick
that,
a couple.
Thank you. Our experience and our clients' experience has been that measurement is this double-edged sword, right? It is arguably the most potential laden tool in our tool belt. It is also the most complex, the most challenging, and the most ever-changing, right? And so for a lot of our clients that rely on brick and mortar, foot traffic measurement and the use of location data, both to identify and target individuals who, when leveraged through the right identity graphing, we can take somebody's smartphone location data patterns and push that into their living room television for ad targeting. Just as importantly, we can use that in the reverse, such that after ad exposure, we can use cell phone location as indicative of whether or not people are visiting physical brick and mortar locations. That was a very, very important tool coming out of COVID. For those who were still sheltering in place, we use location data to demonstrate that these people have not yet re-entered the economy. Let's not serve them messages about going to visit a brick and mortar location. And simultaneously, let's sequester a group of device IDs who have been seen with great frequency in retail establishments and serve them messages about whatever clients of ours have reopened or are now offering whatever the call to action may be. So I would say that location data for both measurement as well as audience identification and targeting has been a very powerful tool. Sadly, that has been dramatically affected by bad actors in the space misusing the data. Apple's iOS 14 app tracking transparency is beginning to deprecate the amount of data that's available. And we're not necessarily in disagreement about the fact that marketers have misused it, but we're going to continue to take advantage of that for as long as it's a viable solution. If and when regulation changes, if and when more privacy protections restrict that data, we'll of course innovate and pivot. And that's why we'll go back to the lab. But other attribution and measurement solutions that we think can be very effective can actually circumvent or get around what we will actually begin to see as, the deprecation of cookies, which I know is arguably the greatest cliche in ad tech today, but utilizing contextual and website keyword-based signals to help us understand, after somebody saw our message on connected television, how did we positively affect their browsing behaviors? And this can be done by scraping bidstream data, understanding the domains and the keywords that are very robustly mentioned throughout those domains and web pages, can help us understand that we served an ad to Libby about a movie preview. And later on after that, we've seen her browsing the web, reading reviews and looking for showtimes and directions to movie theaters. Helps us kind of connect the dots there. So suffice to say that depending upon the campaign and the goals of the campaign, it's very likely Strategist Labs has developed an attribution solution to help measure that effectively. But at the end of the day, the advice here is treat this like an experiment. Have an idea in mind of what success in this campaign looks like. And then let me just, if it's okay, add an epilogue to this. Sadly, this is not a silver bullet, right? This is not going to sell all of your widgets. This is not going to get your candidate elected. This is not going to solve problems in and of itself. We have worked with a number of direct response clients who have very specific CPA goals. And allow me to say, as much as we've done incredible work in bridging the gap from audience identification, ad delivery, and post-ad exposure measurement, this is not necessarily to say that somebody is going to immediately see a message on connected television and go buy a t-shirt or order a pizza. This, just like the rest of marketing, fits into a very thoughtful product mix. And we know, and our data shows us, that this works very well in conjunction with others: paid search and social channels, digital display for cost-effective retargeting tactics. So I think it's important to have an epilogue to know that much as I wish connected television were the silver bullet, this is a very effective, very cutting edge, very compelling tactic, but in and of itself, it still relies on the benefit of other tactics involved as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And always being kind of mindful of overall marketing spend and your marketing mix model. Thank you for being so honest about that. It's definitely true. All right, so it's crystal ball time. So we're going to predict the future now. How do you see the market unfolding in the next year or two? What do you think marketers should do to prepare or take advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the goal here is if we look ahead, let's figure out what we can do to, at nothing worse, prepare ourselves and hopefully take advantage. So this may be cliche, so I apologize in advance, but where do I see in the next 12 to 24 months? Absolutely continuous complexity. The pendulum swinging from fragmentation to consolidation and back again. So I think that what we're going to encounter is, at this point in time, AVOD is the flavor of the week. AVOD is likely the flavor of the next 2 years. And so acknowledging that for those on the publisher side, having a thoughtful ability to monetize your inventory programmatically will be essential. The walled gardens, I think, Wall Street is obviously already speaking about this, but a walled garden, not allowing data in or out, generally speaking, we don't think is going to be the most progressive and thoughtful and sustainable path forward. I guess that you could say I subscribe to the Jeff Green mentality of the open internet. When we all play by the rules, can offer a better viewing experience and can collaborate and take data from multiple disparate sources to offer marketers the most insight to make the whole value proposition better. So if I'm to touch on other trends, so right, like unending complexity, got it. Fragmentation, swinging to consolidation and back, check. I think the next component of this is the data, right? Arguably the greatest differentiator between linear television advertising and connected television advertising is the data that we use to inform which households see our ad and the data that we use to then measure the effect of those ad placements. And I think that what we're seeing today is, probably for good reason, consumer and regulatory sentiment of, I don't love how my data has been misused in the past. Facebook and Google, I'm pointing the finger squarely at you two. But at the same time, also inter-tech kind of fighting, right? I mean, you can be very easily observed that what Apple had done in iOS 14 and the app tracking transparency was to improve privacy. Like, okay, we can debate that all day, but it was certainly pointed at taking a lot of the revenue that was just free flowing to Facebook and diverting that potentially back to Apple. And so I would certainly name one organization to keep an eye out for here is Apple and what they're going to do in their monetization and ad network standpoint. But also I think that if marketers can do one thing, if they can take one thing away from this super long soliloquy of mine, it's that the data that they're sitting on in their CRMs, in their websites, that is a potential gold mine. Maybe a cliche, so I apologize, Libby, but the steel and the oil that built this country in previous generations, today that's data. And so organizations that have been thoughtful and strategic in collecting and aggregating their consumer data and doing meaningful things with it, they're ahead of the game. For the marketers that haven't, you got to start yesterday. Get going on that immediately. Your own first-party data will insulate you from a lot of the complexity and the regulation and the challenges that are occurring in the kind of third-party data space. And it'll also give them a differentiation and an advantage. And you can still work with partners to use third-party data to enrich your first-party data. But having your own data is such an incredibly compelling differentiator. And we believe firmly that the clients that we're working with that are the most strategic and that are the most successful have at least a portion of their campaigns and their strategies that take advantage of their own first-party data.
No, that's great. This is really fun, actually. I'm sure we could talk about this a lot more. And maybe we'll do a part 2, maybe we will. But I'd like to say thank you so much for joining me today. This was great. And I'm Libby Morgan. Thank you all very much for watching.
Thank you so much, Libby. Thanks for watching, everybody. It was my pleasure.